Hey, what's going on? This is your teacher, Mr. H, and welcome back for the third Special Milestones Prep episode of History in a Hoodie. I'm happy to have back my special guest for today's episode, Mrs. Taylor.
And I'm excited to be here as well. For this week's episode, we will review the Georgia history standards from the Civil War era. That will include the causes of the Civil War, Georgia's role in the war itself, and the Reconstruction era and the New South era.
That's a lot of interesting material. Let's get started. The Civil War was caused because the differences of the early states outweighed the commonalities of the states. The northern states, being mostly industrialized by the mid-1800s, had mostly outlawed slavery already and saw the practice as old-fashioned and immoral. The South became a nearly completely agricultural-based economy after the invention of the cotton gin and needed slaves to stay afloat and to maintain their way of life. Southern states thought ending the practice of slavery, as some in the North were beginning to suggest, would collapse their economy and destroy everything they built, and they weren't wrong.
The entire issue came down to representation in the U.S. Senate. As long as there were more pro-slavery votes than anti-slavery votes, nothing would change and the South would remain happy. This came to a head, though, as the Western territories applied to become states and had to decide whether they would have slave states or free states. Several compromises were made: the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, etc., to allow new states into the country without upsetting a balance of power. Eventually, however, after the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, the Southern states had enough and one by one declared secession from the Union. The Confederate States of America elected their own president, Jefferson Davis of Mississippi, and vice president, Alexander Stephens of Georgia, and wrote their own national constitution, which, among other things, guaranteed that slavery would always exist in the CSA. The Civil War began officially when the Confederacy opened fire on the Union troops at Fort Sumter in South Carolina.
Most of the Civil War battles happened in the South. Georgia had a couple major battles towards the end of the war. The Battle of Chickamauga was the largest battle in Georgia and a big Union defeat. In the last year of the war, General Sherman of the Union promised President Lincoln that he would take Savannah as a Christmas present. Sherman began his Atlanta campaign that resulted in the city largely being burned down. Clashing with Southern troops across much of the rest of the state, Sherman burned towns, destroyed bridges, and tore up railroad tracks on his way to Savannah to make resupplying the Confederate Army even more difficult. His army arrived to Savannah a few days before Christmas 1864, concluding his march to the sea.
Georgia was also home to a major prisoner of war camp in Andersonville. This prison was to hold the captured Union soldiers, but quickly became overcrowded. Many captured Union soldiers perished here due to starvation and disease. The Emancipation Proclamation was confirmed by President Lincoln after the Battle of Gettysburg. Here he declared that slaves in the rebellious states were to be made free if the war wasn't ended immediately. Of course, those rebellious southern states weren't particularly listening to Lincoln and the federal government at this time, so it wouldn't be until after the war that slaves would be free at last.
And that freedom came in the form of a constitutional amendment. The 13th Amendment declared that slavery was illegal and ended all forms of indentured servitude. This was followed up quickly with the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing all races citizenship and equal rights as citizens, and the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing all races the right to vote. These collectively were known as the Reconstruction Amendments and kicked off the Reconstruction era, when the reunited states looked to rebuild their towns, of course, but also their societies and trust in their government.
Newly freed slaves were known as freedmen. Many of the freedmen ended up working for low wages on plantations as sharecroppers or tenant farmers because they were largely uneducated and owned little or no property. President Lincoln had planned to forgive and readmit the southern states if they would pledge an oath of loyalty and approve the 13th Amendment. But he was assassinated before most states had the chance to follow suit. His VP, Andrew Johnson, wanted to implement a similar forgiveness plan. But Congress made their own punishing plan, which led to military occupation of the South for 12 years.
During the occupation, freedmen were given many opportunities supported by the military. The Freedmen's Bureau was devised to educate and find employment for former slaves. Because the military was defending their rights, many African Americans voted for the first time, and some were even elected to legislative positions in the South. During this time period, the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist terrorist group, grew up in the South to oppose freedmen's rights. The KKK regularly threatened black voters and politicians to keep laws in Georgia and the South the same way they were before the Civil War. The KKK was extremely effective and became even more so after the congressional military occupation of the South ended.
Without the military making sure all was fair and equal in the Southern communities, Georgia quickly reverted to its old ways. Jim Crow laws were passed to keep the white and black communities separate in our state and to keep whites in power in the government. Some of these laws included disenfranchisement tactics like poll taxes, poll literacy tests, and the white primary, all of which were worked to keep blacks from voting or holding office. A Supreme Court case, Plessy v. Ferguson, made it official. Segregation was the law of the land. During these years, racial violence was not uncommon, including the 1906 Atlanta race riots, but also not limited just to African Americans, as seen in the Leo Frank case, where a Jewish man was lynched for an alleged crime against a white woman.
Some individuals stood out as leading the African American community to progressing forward. Booker T. Washington was a community organizer who suggested blacks could become more respected by working hard and keeping to themselves, while W.E.B. Du Bois wanted blacks to protest and be vocal about their demands for equal treatment. Citizens like Alonzo Herndon, John and Eugenia Burns Hope used their wealth and influence to provide public services for African Americans in Georgia.
Despite the positive influence of the community leaders like Washington, Du Bois, and Herndon, opposition to freedmen's rights held offices of power and passed laws keeping the state separate and definitely not equal. The Bourbon Triumvirate of Brown, Gordon, and Colquitt ran the state for decades and implemented white supremacist laws.
While much of the change in Georgia was social during the post-Civil War years, there was major economic change as well. Where cotton was once king, the state needed to make a change, and Henry Grady was leading the charge. He urged cotton planters to diversify their crops to include corn, peanuts, peaches, and onions. He encouraged industries to build in southern cities. He coined this new economy of Georgia the New South, and promoted it as editor of his newspaper and at the International Cotton Exposition event in Atlanta. Georgia, at least economically, was starting to make the necessary changes to bring itself into the 20th century. Thank you for watching this special Milestones Review episode of History in a Hoodie on the Civil War era history standards.
The next episode will be on modern history and it will be coming out next week.
I hope you learned a lot, and if you did, don't forget to like,
subscribe,
and share. Just kidding. We don't care about that stuff. But do make sure you prepare for your end of grade tests. Good luck!